Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to this week's episode. I am really excited for this topic, y'all. We are going to be talking about parenting triggers and how to cope with them and regulate through them, and why do we have them, and all these really important things that come up for us in the ins and outs of parenting. And I have a guest here with me, Sheena, who we're just talking about before we hit recorded, known each other for a while, but it's been years since we've really connected. And I am so excited to have you here with me today, Sheena, to talk about this really important topic.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's do the brief intro of your work, because you do some really amazing parenting work.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm a responsive parenting coach, and I work with parents all over the world to really help them better understand their kids' behaviors and how to navigate those behaviors both through skills and tools for parents and kids, and also figuring out why, where we get stuck in parenting, kind of, what we're talking about today, right? Why we get triggered as a parent and how it can overwhelm our nervous system. Some of the things that we can do to try to rewire our brain a bit and help our body work more how we want it to work instead of how it's been conditioned to function throughout our childhood, where we didn't really have much of a say. My practice is Parenting Works. If I didn't mention that, I always forget to say the name, but yeah, that's my practice, and I use exclusively a developmental model. So that's one interesting thing about my work. Although I'm so excited that it's becoming a more normal thing, right? It's becoming a more mainstream thing. Still not all the way, but definitely it's not as unique as it was when I went into private practice 12 years ago. And I've been doing this work for 20 years, which is ridiculous. I'm still 20 years old, Kim. How could that be?
And I mean, 20 years old, and you have a daughter in college, don't you?
True. My oldest turned 20 this year. And so yeah, that I parent a full grown adult, which is actually really amazing. But it's a whole different experience, right? So yeah, when I went into private practice, it was very unique to kind of, buck behaviorism and really resist rewards and consequences and look at behavior as a symptom and look at the unmet needs and the missing skills underneath. And so that's the work I've been doing for a long time. But luckily, lots of other professionals are starting to understand that that's important now that we know a bit more about neuroscience and the nervous system. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'm so excited to talk to you today.
It's funny, Sheena. So I feel like it is expanding a lot, right? And so sometimes I'm in my little bubble, just like I'm in my little holistic sleep bubble. I'm in my little developmental bubble. And then I like step out of my bubble and I'm like, oh my God, the behavioralism everywhere.
Yeah.
It's wild to me. Like it just, even places that I don't expect it, like my kiddo's school, they're actually pretty good on so many things developmentally. And when he was having a lot of anxiety in school in third grade, and they're like, here's some ABA resources. And I was like, oh my God, this. Anyway, very behavioral things. For those of you who are listening who have no idea what I'm talking about, it surprises me because I feel like I insulate myself so much sometimes. And then you step out and it is still so strong.
That's such a great point. Absolutely. It's true. I feel like in my world, you're right. It is becoming more, more normalized, but I do see there's a long way to go, especially trainings and professionals. And you're right, schools are fraught with rewards and consequences, and it's really hard for parents who are parenting without rewards and consequences, and then their kids need to go to school and go to a school where they use a behaviorist model.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really challenging for parents to kind of reconcile. So I did see something just this week that, and I've noticed anecdotally that some schools are trying to move away from that, but it's really hard. It's probably going to be a few more decades, I would imagine, before we really get, fully into that new mindset. It's not,
Yeah. Yeah.
new for some. And, that's hoping that we continue all the momentum that we currently have going.
Yeah.
We may lose momentum. I was really, this is totally off topic, Kim, but you could edit it out. I was really surprised to see all the pushback about conscious parenting in the past couple of years, particularly from teachers, because teachers are so deeply ingrained in this mindset of behaviorism in the classroom that they can't figure out how to bridge the gap, and parents are struggling to bridge the gap. And so it's a huge problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's focus back in on
Sorry, Kim.
parenting triggers. No, it's totally fine.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe we should start on a really basic place and define like a trigger. I feel like it's a really common word now, but just to kind of put it in the context of what is happening when you're in these really tricky moments in parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously, I mean, we can experience triggers anywhere in our life, but
Yes.
as parents, one of the main places that we experience triggers is our parenting for lots of reasons, right? Our kids pretty much need us all the time. That can be pretty intense. Um, in general, a trigger is kind of an intense emotional reaction or the resurfacing of a painful memory, and that
Mm-hmm.
is elicited by some sort of stimulus. So it could be a stimulus in the environment. If I see my child hurting their sibling, that might
Mm-hmm.
trigger me from when my big brother, used to fart on my head, which isn't true, Kim, but just, for
Yes.
parents who, I mean, my big sister certainly did plenty of things to me. So those memories are brought back to the surface of emotional sensation and experience from that external event. Or it could
Mm-hmm.
be an internal experience, right? I could be having a memory or having a feeling or a similar sensation that kind of takes me back to that place. And I think what can be really tricky for people to recognize or to manage, that those memories can be episodic, right? That can be a true visual memory that I have, like my brother hurting me, or
Mm-hmm.
it could be a somatic memory. It could be a felt sense, something that was
Mm-hmm.
stored in our experience, either because it was, too traumatic to be remembered episodically, or we were too young or didn't, have the pieces to put it together. The way that I describe triggers when I work with parents is that basically you have an experience, and it could be a small or a big experience, but usually there's some emotional reaction involved. And that experience is not fully processed, it's not well supported. And so it's misfiled. When you're looking for
Mm-hmm.
something and it's supposed to be in the B section, but really, you were distracted by your kid when you were putting it in the file cabinet. So somehow it ended up in the R section, and you find it by accident one day, right? When you're not looking for it, because you're not finding it when you're looking for it, it's not there. But by
Mm-hmm.
accident, you're in the R section and you just stumble upon it. So that is often our experience with triggers. And so our job as responsive parents is to try to help our kids and hopefully ourselves to more fully integrate some of those intense or painful experiences. And it could be anything that is misfiled, right? It doesn't have to be kind of trauma with a capital T. It doesn't have to be your parents getting divorced or a big
Mm-hmm.
move or your pet dying. It could be something small, like you had a fight with your friend and you couldn't resolve it and you didn't have the tools to talk to grown-ups and get some help. So that experience was misfiled. Instead of thinking friendships are work and I need some help with communication, I should ask grown-ups and build these skills, right? You might think, I'm a bad friend. Or I don't like friends who wear red shirts. I'm going to stay away from anybody who wears a red shirt because Johnny had a red shirt on that day when we were having a fight. And that's just dangerous. I'm going to stay away from that. So our triggers are all of those unresolved memories and experiences that come up usually by surprise when we're not expecting them in some of our more vulnerable or stressed parenting moments.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think when I'm thinking about like my clients, right? And parents of babies and toddlers primarily. And of course, a higher than average probably number with intense or very sensitive or high needs kind of
Okay.
littles. Thinking about the things that I see triggering them, which, probably is a shorter list than they would limit them, themselves. But also thinking about myself as would peg myself as a highly sensitive person. And just thinking about like crying, right? Or for babies, right? Like that seems to be such a big trigger for so many parents is not being able to find the underlying need behind crying or toddlers, just their lack of impulse control and just doing the exact opposite of what you say or going through their biting, hitting, whatever phase that is physically hurting you or physically hurting another of your children or physically hurting your animals. Um,
Yes. Yes.
some of the ways, I see parents getting triggered and then, at bedtime with bedtime shenanigans and pushing limits and just that kind of inability to get through a basic routine.
Yeah.
I see those a lot, right? Those kind of just like day-to-day moments where it's like, I don't know, sensory overwhelm. That's actually a big one in my parenting triggers is like noise
100%.
overwhelm.
Yeah.
Um, and that's fun when you have two loud children. But also just like that either that intense need of you or that kind of feeling like things are out of control. I feel like I see those a lot in my own life, but also like in the parents that I'm working with. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I feel like, there are so many ways that we're not well prepared for parenthood, both personally and, from a social point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely nobody ever told me how overstimulating parenting would be. And I would have appreciated that information. That would have been a good heads up that I could have had. As a person who does have a very sensitive nervous system, that would have
Mm-hmm.
been useful for me to know going in, hey, it's going to be important to pay attention to this. And I find that all the time too. Parents are really overstimulated by noise, particularly kids are loud. They make a lot of noise. And uh, I don't know why houses seem to carry noise so much, right? I'm all, wherever I'm like, this house should hold the noise better than it
Yeah.
does.
Open floor plans. I regularly, so we live in a pretty standard DC row home.
Okay.
And the first floor is all open. Like there are some walls that kind of define the living room a little bit, but
Yeah.
there's no doors, it's all open. And like my two things that I complain about on a regular basis is one, I can't sneak chocolate very easily because my kids always hear me. But two, is like there's no way to block the noise. Even like, we talk about we just need like those big curtains from like a theater to like
Uh-huh.
go down the middle of our house so that like the kids can be loud in the living room and we can sit in our kitchen and like actually have a conversation. Because there are times when we cannot hear ourselves think and we don't have a basement to like that's what we got sent to when we were loud as kids. Like go be loud in
Right.
the basement or go outside.
Yes.
And when outside isn't an option, for whatever reason, like it's
Yeah.
weather-wise or whatever, then it's like
Yeah.
we don't have any way to block the sound. And it's like, oh my God, I just want to actually be able to hear my husband answer my question and have a conversation. So like,
I feel like your
yeah.
theater curtains is a great idea. I think you should pilot that, and you're on a new trend there, Kim. I do I just like open floor plans also because they're really difficult to baby proof.
Yeah.
So for all the reasons they're not ideal for families in some cases. Yeah, noise, mess, right? Really any sensory overload can be hugely triggering for parents. And what I find is that most of the time parents aren't necessarily aware of some of those triggers or even aware that they should be paying attention to them or kind of on the
Hmm.
lookout until it's too late. They're already flooded. And this has a lot to do with, the things that I think contribute to us being so easily triggered, like unmet needs. If we were up all night with a baby or we are handling, everything solo and we don't have a lot of family or community support, or if we are stressed about breastfeeding, or there are so many ways that parents, especially moms in our society, have just chronically unmet needs,
Yes.
in terms of eating, in terms of sleeping, in terms of exercise, in terms of having time to move their body and be with friends and be creative and have spiritual connection, even if that's with nature. There are so many things that our bodies naturally need, and it's difficult to find those things if all of our efforts are focused on parenting and family life and taking care of a home. And then you add in all the other things, right? Working and a spouse and, you know, for aging parents, a
Hmm.
home that needs maintenance, so many things. So that those really unmet needs are such a huge challenge. And I know as parents, it can feel really impossible, right? To feel like I'm going to get my needs even close to fully met. And then on top of that, we add in the attachment wounds that we bring to parenting, right? All the experiences that we have where as children, we didn't feel like our needs were necessarily met in a way that was consistent or reliable or helpful, even by no fault of our parents, just because they didn't understand our needs or they weren't capable of meeting those needs for a variety of reasons. And so, you have the sensory overload, you have the unmet needs, you have the attachment wounds. Like you said, parenting, especially parenting babies and toddlers, right? Parenting very young children and parenting kids with neurodivergent brains. So I have a kid who's almost 9 who has a neurodivergent brain, and it's not quite the same as parenting a toddler, but it is a lot more executive functioning
Yes.
part of me externally than for my other kid who's 8 who has a neurotypical brain. And especially when you are doing all of the executive functioning externally for your baby and toddler,
Mhm.
that is a tremendous amount of output for your body. And so all of those things together mean that sometimes we're a raw nerve, right? And we didn't even mention things like postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, you know, anything, having a neurodivergent brain yourself as a parent, which can make you feel more impacted by some of those intense emotions, or having a baby or being pregnant can impact your medicine in some cases, right? So there are so many factors that really can make it so that parents and moms especially find themselves very easily triggered. And I know so often people feel like, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? What did I do? Especially if it's an ongoing thing, if there's, what feels like rage involved, which is something that we don't talk about enough, right? Especially if you are, again, doing so many things on your own without appropriate and necessary support. Yeah, that rage is real. It can feel so difficult to just do everything in the course of a day or a week or a month or a year.
Yeah, and I feel like if you have a highly sensitive or more intense baby, and everyone around you, or toddler, and everyone around you has maybe more easygoing kiddos, then that's just like a whole nother layer on top where like it's just the temperament differences in children, really shape how much work it is to parent them. Like it just
Yes.
does, and that's not fair, and it doesn't magically, you know, go away when they're not babies anymore. But I mean, the baby and toddler years are the most intense for parenting for anyone. And so then you throw in, you know, you mentioned neurodivergent kiddos and peoples, but also just those temperaments that are more sensitive and maybe we go on to know they are neurodivergent, maybe we don't, and they're just more sensitive and more persistent and more intense kiddos. And it's a different experience than your kind of average or easygoing kiddo.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting, even in the same family, how different kids can be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, I think that it's always a challenge for families, like you said, when they're comparing to their peers or a sibling of their child. They're saying, "Wait, your sibling, didn't need this," or my parents are telling me you shouldn't need this. I didn't need this, right? There's a lot of talk from grandparents and everybody else to say what's going on. There's something wrong with your child if they have these needs. And
Mm-hmm.
really, there's just a range of needs, and we're taught to see a very narrow slice of this is what needs should be, when actually, or all of us, grown-ups included, there's a wide range of needs that is considered normal. And, as I know you work really hard, Kim, and you do a great job helping your clients understand who their kids are and just meeting them where they are and responding to who they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's remarkable to think this, but that is a very new concept, right? I think, our parents' generation and previous generations didn't always take that approach.
Mm-hmm.
It was, this is who our family is, and you're going to fit into the family no matter what. Um, so in some ways, we're paving new territory, and social media certainly doesn't help if you're saying,
Yes.
okay, I was up 3 times with my baby, or 5 times, or 8 times with my baby, and my friend just posted this picture that her baby, who's younger than my baby, slept all night. And then that guilt and that worry and that shame, all connected to our early experiences with our connection needs and our attachment wounds, all of those things start to set in. And then absolutely we think, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my baby? Am I doing something wrong as a parent? And, I think you too, a big part of my job is helping parents understand this is normal. This is normal for a child. This is normal for parenting. This is normal for a sibling. All of these experiences are actually very normal. It's unfortunate that we live in a society that is really behind in understanding that, but these things are normal. And so it does make it harder to kind of navigate in this very information laden world where there is a lot of contradicting information saying
Yes.
your baby shouldn't be waking that much, when really, yeah, they have a need. It's okay.
Yeah, especially with sleep. And I feel like especially with social media, and like Instagram and TikTok over the last, I don't know, whatever many years, as compared to like when my oldest is 11, as compared to when he was a baby. There's much more responsive info out there, but there's also much more sleep training info out there, and there's much more sneaky sleep training info out there. And so I
uh,
feel like it's such a wild landscape that we have to understand what's normal and that it's normal and okay to be triggered by parenting your baby sometimes, right? Like I think there's that expectation that it should all feel good and wonderful. And if my baby cries, I should immediately know what's wrong and I should always be able to soothe them. And
mm,
like just this unrealistic expectation of both how our baby should behave, but also what parenting is like,
yes,
especially in a modern Western culture where we live in nuclear families that at best we may have two parents around to support, right? And
yes.
that's also not a lot of people's reality. We have solo parents, we have parents with one parent deployed or working crazy hours. We have not enough support. And, I think you were speaking really lovely to that about all those unmet needs and sensory needs and all those pieces. And so all these things are going to shape how those emotions come up in those tricky, intense moments. Um,
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit more about the attachment wounds, like how we
Okay.
were parented and how that shows up. And then I want to talk about some regulation tips because I know you have a lot
Perfect.
of great ideas around that. But I want to talk a little bit about that idea of how we are parented and how our emotions were received kind of impacts on our reacting to intense moments in our own lives or with our own kiddos.
Yeah. Oh, this is fun. So as humans, obviously, as mammals, we are really reliant on our caregivers for survival. And that means that we, are really connected to them, not just physically, but, psychologically and emotionally. And so we're actually building the neural pathways of a brain through those responsive and connection experiences in the early years, right? All of that attunement, all of that limbic resonance, that back and forth, you, your baby coos and you talk back to them. You sing to your baby and they smile at you. Your toddler asks a question and you answer it, even if they've already answered the question, right? So
Yes.
there's all of that interaction specifically is what is wiring the brain. And that's the, kind of hardware and the software of the brain. So that's the how our brain is actually wired, and then all of the skills and expectations that we have when it comes to interacting with others and communicating and attuning to ourselves and understanding our needs. So I use a protocol called NARM, which is a psychological look at how these early experiences are formed and obviously how we can heal them. But the basic premise is that we have 5 core attachment wounds and how those wounds, 5 core attachment needs and how those needs are met, consistently, reliably, not perfectly, right? This is not about perfection, but just, most of the time, reliably, how those needs are met in our early years really wires our brain for all of the relationship experiences and skills that we are going to have pretty much for the rest of our life. That doesn't mean that, it's set in stone, right? If you had some early experiences that weren't great, you can rewire your brain. You can say, hold on, I would like to have a different relationship with with some of these experiences. But, you do have to do that work. Your brain is wired basically by how these connection needs are met by 6 years old, which I know is really intense for parents, right? Especially parents who have kids older than 6, or they're thinking about themselves and they think, wow, what if I didn't have these things met? So again, your brain has plasticity. You can make a lot of changes to your brain wiring. This is not destiny. But how these needs are met really do influence that initial wiring of your brain. And so you might need to move some highways around or change some things in order to really get the brain that you're looking for. So the needs are connection, attunement, trust, autonomy, and then love and sex. And those kind of go together because obviously in adulthood, that connection is feeling like, I exist, I am worthy of existing. And attunement is really feeling like my needs matter. It's okay to have needs. It's okay to express my needs. It's okay to have needs that are different than yours, perhaps. And then obviously trust, right? That reliability that we're going to have our needs met and that we can count on the people in our lives to meet our needs. And this is a really big one that shows up with our control and our attachment needs, right? Because as parents, if we find ourselves triggered by maybe a behavior that we don't like in our child, we don't always have the trust in that moment that they will get this skill, this behavior will stop, right? This
Yes.
night waking will end, this hitting phase will end, this biting phase will end. There will be other phases for sure, but all of these things, we can help our kids build the skills. We can have full trust in them and in ourselves that we can help them. But that is where a lot of parents get stuck, right? Because we didn't necessarily have that trust when we were younger. And then the autonomy, right? Feeling like we can have our own needs and our own desires and our own feelings separate from others, especially our caregivers. And this, again, is a place where a lot of people get stuck. There's a lot of people pleasing. And you mentioned about crying being such a huge trigger for parents and grandparents, right? crying is a huge trigger because for most of us and for many generations, crying was not allowed, right? You stop that crying by any means necessary. And I see this especially with grandparents. They're like, oh my gosh, what do we need to do? They almost get this frenetic, out of control energy because they just can't handle the crying. And you're right, sometimes crying does mean something. Sometimes we can identify that need, and sometimes we can't,
Yeah.
right? And that's okay. We can still provide support even if we can't identify the need. And I know you work really hard with your clients on that, but crying is, bound to be a big trigger because of our previous experience with crying growing up, right? Most of us were told, I'll give you something to cry about. This isn't worth crying about. Um, oh, it's no big deal. Just get over it. Suck it up. Your brother's not crying. Why are you crying? There were so many harmful, dismissive, shaming messages about crying in particular, any emotion, but crying in particular, um, when we were growing up and when our parents' generations were growing up, that it has a visceral effect on our nervous system, right? There's this sense of this is a huge emergency and I have to stop it right away. And that, again, that is something that you can work on, and it takes a lot of practice. It is a ton of work to be okay with crying, especially your child's crying, right? It might be easier for you if your friend is crying or your sister, you're like, I can handle that. Or a kid crying on a play date, right? You're not as triggered by that as your child crying because it just, reminds you of whatever you weren't allowed to do with your crying when you were a child, or all of those stuffed crying experiences from when you were a child.
And I feel like crying in particular is so tricky because there is that like evolutionary instinct to it compel you to act, to do something, to nurture, to take care of the baby. There's like that, I don't want to say normal, but that kind of level. And then there's like the really triggered kind of level that's above that natural urge to like nurture a crying baby. That's
Yeah.
like I'm so uncomfortable. I'm so anxious. I'm so feeling so much more intensity around the crying. That's like a whole different level. And so I
Yes.
just want to make that distinction there that like a parental brain is hardwired. We wouldn't have survived as a species if we were not compelled to take care of a crying baby. But being triggered by crying is like a level of, it's more than that. It's more than that, like sort of evolutionary adaptive response to crying.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Kim. And you're absolutely right. We want you to respond to your babies, right? We want you to respond to your toddlers. We want you to respond to your big kids.
Mhm.
We want you to be responsive and engage, even if you can't engage physically, at least verbally, right? Hold on, baby. I'm in the shower. I'll be out in just a minute. You can always respond to your child's signals, even if you don't know what exactly they're asking for, or you can't meet their need right away. And you hit it right on the head. The difference is in the anxiety, right? There's a difference between saying, oh, my child is crying. I'm seeing that as them communicating a need, and I can feel stable enough, connected to my authentic self enough to be able to help them figure out that need, right? Or ride it out with them and still be able to be somewhat present, right? Even if get, kind of, okay, I'm looking over here, I'm, feeling the ground with my foot or something, right? Because I can't just focus on my crying baby all the time. So, even if you're focusing on yourself sometimes too, right? That is a very distinct sensation in the body than the mental and physical urge to fix it, right? If your baby is crying, especially if you can't identify the need, right? Or, I know for a lot of reasons, parents are, kind of highly sensitive. They're worried about their babies need, or they're really feel like, I don't want to wake up my older child, so I have to get the baby to stop crying because that's going to wake up everybody, and then it disrupts our night, or something like that, right? Where those are very real things that happen all the time, where parents are so focused on the crying that they're almost missing the people underneath the crying. And so that kind of intensity, that urgency to say, I can't have this crying, that's the trigger, right? That's where our anxiety takes over and says, I need to do whatever it takes to stop this feeling, because I don't trust myself that I can ride it out. I don't trust myself that I can support my child. I don't trust my child that they can get through this. And especially if you have a baby, that can feel very real in that moment.
Yeah. I feel like that's a perfect segue into talking about some strategies for
Yeah.
regulating yourself to better weather these moments, to have more resiliency in these moments.
Yes. Okay. So do you want to talk about some tools? There's so many tools I could
I
talk
know.
about. I literally teach my clients hundreds of tools, but we can talk about a few tools, and then maybe we could even practice if you feel like that would be helpful.
Yeah, why don't you like think about parent of a baby or toddler? Like, what are maybe two tools you're teaching on a regular basis that you think would
Okay.
be?
So before I talk about the specific tools, I just want to make sure, that we set everybody up for success, because this is really important. So obviously, these are, any kind of regulation tool is something that you can use successfully in the moment, right? If I'm driving in traffic and I am getting frustrated, I can do my deep breathing. I can do my EFT tapping. I can roll my windows down and get some fresh air, or take a drink of cold water, or listen to some soothing music, right? I can use these tools in the moment when I need them. But one of the biggest mistakes that families and even clinicians make when they're talking about regulation tools for kids or for grown-ups
Mhm.
is just talking about practicing them in the heat of the moment, right? I don't want to wait until my baby is crying in the middle of the night to start a new tool. I don't want to wait until my toddler is having an intense afternoon where they just hit their sibling and, scratched me, to try to teach them a coping skill or a regulation tool. That is never the time to teach or even really practice without a lot of rapport and some kind of street cred with those tools. So the most important lesson that I could ever tell anybody about regulation tools is you have to practice proactively. You have to practice when the stakes are very low. So you can practice when, there's really nothing going on, and you just say, okay, I'm going to practice this skill. I'm going to practice this tool. And it means nothing to me right now. I'm just practicing. I'm just building that muscle in my body that this is an option for me, paying attention to whether I like it or not, right? I'm just getting some mastery with this tool. And then you can move on to some maybe a little bit intense, but not super high stakes moments, right? So, that might be helping your child put their shoes on, but not the middle of the night waking. We
Mhm.
don't want to have our focus on regulation be in those moments when we need it most. And I know that's counterintuitive, but if we really want to be able to rely on the tools in those moments when we really need them, we have to build that rapport with the tools outside of the moment, so that you don't have to think about it as much, so your body is more comfortable, right? You actually can use the tool and not only have it be effective, but there's that word again, trust that it will be effective, because we are only going to use regulation tools that we believe will work for us. If you tell me today, right, oh, Sheena, you're having a rough day, try this tea that I swear by. if I am not a tea person and this is a new experience for me, I'm not going to do that when I'm stressed with my kids at bedtime. I'm going to do what I am already used to and know is going to work, right? That is how our brain works. It kind of uses the thing that's most often used or most often thought about or most recently used. And so that is my biggest takeaway is try these things proactively and really figure out what's going to work for you. And then you can, practice in the moment as well when you need them. But definitely, get ahead of yourself, not just in the moment. And I know you had mentioned, kind of before, during, and after. So afterwards, yes, you can, continue to practice your skills. You can check in and follow up with your kid or make a repair if necessary. But I would say the most important thing about using these skills or being triggered or, being dysregulated in the moment with parenting, afterwards, check in with yourself and give yourself compassion, right? Ask yourself, what did this trigger in me? What were my unmet needs? Oh my gosh, I hadn't eaten today. Oh my gosh, my child did that yesterday. And so today it felt even more frustrating because now it feels like they're always going to do that and it's never going to be different. So that, certainly is the most important thing about regulation and, being dysregulated, especially as a parent. We have to be so kind and gentle with ourselves because this is a really hard thing.
I love that framing. I mean, I absolutely love it. And I've seen you talk about the practicing proactively on social media. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. Because I think it's so important, and that checking in with yourself afterwards, because that reflection can teach us a lot about what's going on for us in those moments. Because things trigger you on some days that don't trigger you on other days. And so there's that variation.
Absolutely. Oh, that's such a great point. Yeah, because there's the buildup and we might be well rested yesterday, but today we're tired, and so now that child snatching a toy that really affected us so much more than yesterday we were able to roll with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the top tools that I recommend all across the board, just because it is so effective, is a breathwork practice called heart math breathing. And so that is actually a combination of breathwork and a little bit of meditation. And it's extremely effective. Every time I teach it, whenever people practice it, they really find that it is beneficial in just a couple of minutes, which is nice. And you could do it while you are holding a child, while you are wearing a child, while you are laying down with a child, or sitting on the floor with a child. So it's something that you could do anywhere, not while you're driving, but anywhere other than that. Certainly something that you could practice easily and use in the moment. And I don't know if you want me to describe what that
Yeah,
looks like.
describe it. And
Yeah.
I think that's something I can link to in the show notes also, right? There's info out
Yeah, so
in the
I
notes.
I can send you some graphics, Kim, that you can
Yes, please.
share, which kind of talks about the directions. But essentially, when I walk through it with parents, is that I ask them to take a total of 9 breaths. The first 3 breaths are just normal. We're just observing the breath. The second set of three, I ask them to focus on lengthening their exhale. And we do that by putting our hand on the chest, which is already regulating. And then as you exhale, you really try to push the exhale out through your hand and your heart. So it gives you something to focus on. And then the last set of 3 breaths, we continue to have that nice long exhale pushing out through our hand and our heart. And we add a positive thought. That's the meditative part. So we add whatever we want that makes you feel joy or feel good. So it could be your favorite food or, your favorite place. I often think about my wedding day. I'm just like, that's a core memory, that I can always bring up, and it feels good every time, no matter what. And so heart math breathing, I didn't invent it, but I am a huge advocate. I think it's a really great introduction to breath work and meditation, because a lot of people find meditation specifically very hard to get into. And breath work, some people like it, some people don't like it. So this is an accessible one that people, even if you don't like breath work, I recommend trying it and just seeing if it works for you. There are tons of breath work exercises. This happens to be my personal and professional favorite. Um, Another one that I would recommend, high on my list for parents of babies and toddlers, singing or humming. Because again, you can do that with your child on you, next to your child, when your child is screaming, when your child is crying. You could do that even if you are not holding your child, right? If your child is over there because they are kicking and you don't want to be next to them and you're nearby, you can still hum and it will be regulating for you, right? Because it stimulates your vagal nerve by activating, the saliva production here in the back of your throat. Um, but also, it's very regulating for your child to hear that humming. And you might even notice that kids pick up on this, and then, during their play, they're just humming to themselves. Singing also is great because, again, it's pretty neutral, right? You're just singing and helping your child ride out some of their feelings or singing through some of your limits or some of your needs, right? I need to get a drink of water right now. Don't be afraid to use these tools, communicate and get your needs met as a parent, because again, it's regulating and it is a helpful thing for you to model for your child.
I love that.
Uh, and then, anything that would include movement or sensory stimulation. So there's a few that I love, like a butterfly hug, or yeah, butterfly hug, and some alternate tapping. Something that again, I think parents could easily use kind of wherever they are is to cross your arms on your thighs and put some pressure onto your thighs, but you do want to cross your arms so you have that bilateral stimulation, and you're just providing that nice firm pressure, that proprioceptive pressure. It's the same, pressure if you give yourself a nice tight hug. So that's something again that you could do in the heat of the moment with your child, in the nighttime when they're needing you, when they wake up in the night, or in those tough toddler moments. That's something that you could do wherever you are. My mantra for I started out as my mantra when my oldest was a teen, but I think it applies for every age, right? They're doing a really good job of being a toddler right now. They're doing a really good job of being a baby right now. Oh my gosh, you're crying because I can't get the food package open enough. You're actually doing a really good job being a toddler right now. That's what toddlers do. So, having that perspective shift, you know, having a mantra definitely is a regulation tool, but anything that you can do in that moment as you're doing the deep pressure, as you're grounding yourself, as you're taking a deep breath, or something like that, right? Anything like that, you can remind yourself in the moment or after the fact. If you cannot remember, right? You cannot access that executive functioning in the moment. That's okay, but remind yourself at some point in the journey, like, yep, my kid is doing a good job and I've got this.
I love that. And I love that you gave three strategies that really appeal to regulation in different ways and that are all so accessible in the middle of complete and utter chaos. Like, because I know that's when I usually need them is like, even with my kids, they're 6 and 11 now. The 6-year-old, I feel like, was the easiest, 0 to 3, which is very atypical. And like 3 to 6, she's just been little Miss Sassy. It's hilarious. Still overall an easier child than my oldest, but it's like, it's always in the midst of the chaos. Like, and those having tools that are easy to implement because you practice them, like you said, but also easy to implement because they're just easy to do in the midst of life. You're just going to use them more, and then they're going to just in turn become more and more effective.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why breath work can be great, right? If you do a little bit of practice with breath work, then your body does, kind of build an instinct, so to speak, where it can do that even when you don't realize it. I know, like when I watch scary movies, my spouse will notice me and I'm like, doing a deep breath. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, my body is just responding to this, intensity in this movie right now. So you can, definitely have some go-tos. One of my go-tos is a cute cold, like drinking cold water, sucking on ice cubes, I'm not opposed to sticking my head in the freezer, Kim. I just
I love
things
it.
that help give you kind of that hard reset. But yeah, definitely find something that even if you have one thing that is a reliable go-to, then you can always expand from there. But I think that's people get overwhelmed, right? They say there's so many tools and I don't know where to start. And, especially people who don't like breath work or people who feel maybe more disconnected from their bodies in certain ways or more intensity from their bodies, right? If you are in your body all the time in a very highly sensitive way, meditation is probably not for you, right? Because that is just more intensity, in your body. You're just feeling it more, and that might not be what you're looking for. So, so thinking about the ways that work for each person, and even if you just find one way and practice that way, get really comfortable with it, and then you can always add more. So don't, no need to have novelty be the primary factor, right? Even if you just have something that you use the same thing most of the time, that's actually okay. And, obviously I want parents to have a big toolbox because you never know what you're going to need. But if you just have one thing that you can use really reliably, which is, a regulating tool, that's a great start.
I love that. And that's so easy to get started then is just picking one thing, practicing it and and running with it rather than feeling like you immediately have to have everything. I feel like this conversation could go on and on and on and I like oh my gosh, there's so many things we could talk about. For the sake of time,
Yeah,
I think we'll wrap up here because that's such a good place to start, right? Like just start with one tool. Or it's a good place to wrap up because it's such a good starting point, right? Start with one tool and bring it into practice and bring it into those moments. So, Sheena, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. I like want to now have a whole separate deep dive conversation with you more regulation because I'm like, oh my God, I love it. And I will share in the show notes, I will get from you any resources from some of these things if you can share with me that you mentioned, but also your info and your where they can find you for your work.
sure. Yeah. So I am just finishing up my most recent publication, which is called The Grandparent's Guide to Responsive Parenting Tools. And so it's for grandparents. It's about 180-page workbook, which really breaks down a lot of the tools of responsive parenting, setting limits, listening to feelings, understanding the root cause of behavior. And then there are some sections with like frequently asked questions. And all the main section, the bulk of the book, are kind of everyday challenges that grandparents might face, like why is my grandchild ignoring their parent? Or what if I don't feel like my grown child is parenting enough or disciplining enough? Those kinds of things. So those questions are all tackled with step-by-step instructions on what grandparents can do and say in those moments in order to best support their relationships with their grandkids and their grandkids' parents.
I love that. I'm going to have to get that link from you and share it in the show notes and have it on hand for my own clients when they are dealing with some pushback from their parents or their in-laws because that happens so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah, it's kind of where my work is organically shifting because there's so much grandparent stuff in the mix.
I love it. Thank you so much, Sheena. I really appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been so fun to chat with you.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.